On Thursday, Brits went to the polls to elect 8,058 local councillors in some 230 councils across England. Both parties were doing a lot of expectation management before the vote. Keir Starmer explained that the last time these seats were contested in 2019, the Tories did pretty terribly, largely due to Theresa May's unpopularity. So this time around, the Conservatives should be expecting gains to bring them back to pre-2019 numbers.
So I think for the Conservative Party, the baseline is on the floor, and they should be making gains. And if they can't make gains on that awful set of results, then I think there are serious questions as to whether Rishi Sunak is going backwards.
On the other hand, the Conservatives were claiming that anything fewer than 1,000 losses would be a good night, given where they're currently sitting in the polls.
The Conservatives will lose more than 1,000 seats and that Labour need to make big gains. That is what the expectation is out there.
OK.
But I've been up and down the country, the Conservatives were fighting really hard. I've got some great councils.
You're predicting a 1,000-seat loss, or are you just trying to massage our expectations here?
That is what the independent experts, Professors Rallings and Thrasher, John Curtis, are all predicting.
In reality, the base case was somewhere in the middle, with most people expecting the Conservatives to lose a few hundred seats. Unfortunately for Sunak, however, things have turned out pretty badly for the Conservatives, and at time of writing, it looks like they're on track to lose over 1,000 seats. So in this video, we're going to take a look at the local election results, what the results mean, and whether they could spell the end for Sunak, as they did for Theresa May in 2019. So the first thing to say is that we covered how local elections work and what to look out for in a previous video. So if you want to know more, go have a look at that. For those of you who can't be bothered, the main takeaway from that video was that, because 2019 was a truly terrible year for the Tories, we advised you not to pay too much attention to losses and gains, and instead focus on what's known as projected vote share. As Keir Starmer mentioned, in 2019, which is the last time these seats were contested, the Conservatives were led by Theresa May, who was trying and failing to get her Brexit deal through Parliament. The Brexiteers were angry with May for not getting Brexit done, and Remainers were angry at her for going too hard on Brexit and bulldozing the UK's constitutional norms, which is why Theresa May's Conservative Party did terribly in 2019. May lost over 1,300 councillors and 44 councils, winning just 28% of the popular vote, and she resigned just a few weeks later. This is why most people expected the Conservatives to only lose a few hundred seats, because they were starting from such a low benchmark, and why we instead recommended looking at projected national share, which basically takes the vote share at the local elections and transposes it onto the broader UK electorate. Here, we argued that Labour should be looking to achieve at least a 10-point lead here, and ideally at least 15 points, because these are the sorts of numbers Blair and Cameron were looking at before they won their elections. At the 1996 local elections, for example, a year before the 1997 Labour landslide, Blair's Labour had a 16-point lead over John Major's Conservatives. At the 2009 local elections, a year before Cameron's majority in 2010, the Conservatives won by 15 points. However, the results were so bad for the Tories that it doesn't really matter whether you look at seats or projected national share. At time of writing, on Friday morning, they're on track to lose over 1,000 seats, and their projected national share is about 25%, which is one of their lowest ever. The news was so bad that the Conservatives didn't even try and spin it.
It's always disappointing to lose hard-working Conservative councillors, their friends, their colleagues, and I'm so grateful to them for everything that they've done. In terms of the results, it's still early. We've just had a quarter of the results in.
Conservative chairman Greg Hands also admitted that it had been a disappointing night for the party and the government. So, does this mean it's good news for Labour? Well, yes and no. Labour did win a significant number of seats off the Tories, and in some areas, a bad night for the Tories is, by definition, a good night for Labour. However, at time of writing, projected vote share is giving Labour just an 8-point lead, which is significantly lower than the leads that Blair and Cameron enjoyed before their majorities. This is because Conservative losses have actually been split relatively evenly between Labour and the Lib Dems, who had a particularly good night. Despite winning over 700 councillors in 2019, essentially doubling their total, the Lib Dems won hundreds more seats this time around, with particularly strong showings in southern rural seats. Similarly, it was a pretty good night for the Greens, who managed to win over 100 seats and, in terms of vote share, saw a greater increase than any other party. The Greens struggle at national elections, but the number of Green councillors has been rising exponentially for the past few years, and this trend looks set to continue here. All in all, a terrible result for the Conservatives, an okay result for Labour, and a good result for the Lib Dems and Greens. Perhaps the headline takeaway here is that there's clearly a really committed anti-Tory vote, even if they are split between the opposition parties at the moment. So, how have the Tories reacted to these results? Well, predictably, more right-wing Conservatives are blaming it on Sunak's political mildness, and have called for him to adopt what they describe as proper Conservative policies, which basically means be more right-wing and more ardently Brexiteer. There's even been some murmurings about bringing back Boris Johnson, which is basically what happened after Theresa May's local election result in 2019. So, is this going to happen? Will the Tories actually bring Boris back? Well, as we see it, this is still very unlikely. The Conservatives would be mad to switch leaders this soon before a general election, especially when they've already got a reputation for internal chaos. And while Sunak hasn't done well here, Boris Johnson is conspicuously less popular than the current Prime Minister. Most Tory MPs know this, which is why we think Sunak will still be able to continue in post. Nonetheless, Tory MPs did vote for Truss, so you can't rule anything out. If you made it this far, you'll definitely enjoy the Modern Conflict series. That's a show made by our friends over at Real Life Law, where they break down recent conflicts from around the world, including the Ethiopian civil war and the war in Ukraine, which we've discussed a bunch before in TLDR's videos, as well as things like the US's invasion of Afghanistan and the Turkey-Greek Cold War. It's an incredible series, and it's only available on our streaming service, Nebula. You'll find a bunch of TLDR stuff on Nebula too. Every weekday we post an extended version of our show, The Daily Briefing, exclusively on Nebula, giving you bonus discussions and explainers. On Sundays we release our show This Week in Parliament, which summarises the week's goings-on in Westminster, only on Nebula. Throughout the week we released videos earlier on Nebula than on YouTube. Every video on Nebula is ad-free, which means that this isn't even here. And most importantly, signing up to Nebula is the best way to support TLDR and all the creators building the platform. It's also super cheap, just a couple of pounds a month. So if you want all of that incredible stuff, then please do sign up using the link in the description.